Hello everyone, I'm here with Brett and we're here to talk about part 2 of our Mark summer series, which this part starts on July 16th and it will end on September 3rd. So Brett, why don't you tell us a little bit about it?
Yeah, part 2 of Mark. Really look at the second half of the book after beginning in chapter 9 through the end of Mark there. And turn our eyes, we see Jesus again and again in this latter part of the book start talking about the cross. If the first part of the book was all trying to understand who he was as the king and his identity, this really puts into focus his purpose, why he came, not only in his teaching, but also he knew from the beginning that he'd have his eyes towards the cross. And so we're going to see a lot of intentional conversation about the cross and the role it played in Jesus' life and his ministry, and what it means for us as followers of Jesus. So we're calling this one the day the revolution began, and talking about the fact that everything changes on the cross. It is his act of self-giving, self-sacrificing love that begins the revolution that God has intended for this world. So we talked about Jesus as a king in the first part, and here we're talking about a king who would do the unthinkable for his people, that he would come and die in their place. So we're jumping in to this idea, and it's a 7-week series, 8-week series, focusing on that latter part of Mark. Jump in? You ready?
Yeah, let's
go week by week.
Yeah. Try
Try to be efficient with the time so we don't get you guys on here for 20 minutes. But week 1 will be at the Transfiguration. So Jesus, with his closest disciples, go up on the Mount of Transfiguration. He's met by Moses and Elijah. And what in the world is going on, right? There's a lot of different symbolism and pieces. Mountains have always been a powerful thing that we see throughout the Bible, of a place where people encounter God. Moses encountered God on a mountain. Elijah had a great encounter with God on a mountain. But here there's something even more for us. And we're going to see that Jesus does something that the mountain can never do, that prophets could never do, that priests could never do, that the temple could never do, to show us with great clarity the glory of God, who God truly is, and what that means for us. And so we're going to kind of walk through the story there, and I've got it kind of detailed, kind of parsed out bits of it for you there. I think in that the first full paragraph on the second page, the last line is there. This is a paraphrase from Tim Keller. No tabernacle, no priest, no mountain is needed to bridge the human and divine. Jesus has done it. Jesus can give us what Elijah couldn't, what Moses couldn't, what no one else could deliver. And so here we get a picture of Jesus as being the one who is the go-between God and man. In fact, Peter doesn't know what to do. He freaks out a little bit. He says, "Oh, let's build some tents here," after they see Jesus in his glory. They don't know what to make of it. This word for tents, the same word as a tabernacle. This was a meeting place for God, but it was also a place where God's glory could be mitigated, where there was a go-between between man and God. Mm-hmm. And the voice comes from heaven, no, this is my son. Next thing you know, Jesus is walking down the mountain with his disciples. He's talking about his crucifixion. Mm-hmm. And this was just a paradox that these guys could not connect with the glory they've just seen revealed in Jesus, the radiance of him revealed for who he is in the full glory of God. And now he's talking about rising from the dead. Like, it just doesn't compute. And we begin to see all of a sudden Jesus has different priorities, that Jesus would see the cross as the blazing center of God's glory and his love, and really the focus on what he'd come to do. Even though it was unthinkable for his disciples, there's greater glory yet to come, which will be seen in Jesus' death and resurrection. So we're going to talk a little bit about how we encounter God, but ultimately how we're called to encounter God through Jesus, where we see God's glory most clearly. So
awesome.
Week 1. Week 2, we're going to talk about the story of the rich young ruler. And he comes up to Jesus. What do I need to do to be saved? Jesus says, well, you know the law, right? Do that and you will live. And the rich man, young man tells him, I've kept all these since I was young. And we see that it says that Jesus loved him. All right, one thing you lack. Sell all that you have. Give it to the poor. Follow me. We don't see this as a condemnation of this man. We don't see this as Jesus kind of piling on or saying, hey, you think you're good, but you're really a horrible person. it says that Jesus loved him. He knew that something deeper in his heart was needed, and that was Jesus. That was Jesus himself, that there was something in his heart between him and who God had fully called him to be. And in this guy's case, it was his wealth. And so it's going to bring up some touchy subjects in our culture. It's going to be, as we talk about wealth, that's nothing that any of us feel comfortable with, and yet Jesus talks about it again and again. We know that in that culture, for Jesus and his disciples, many people would have seen a connection between wealth and blessing. If you were wealthy, it was just a sign that God had somehow blessed you. So many Jews in that time believed that, especially a rich young ruler like this who was following God's law. If this guy can't be saved, and he's following the law, and he's rich, so he's blessed by God, who in the world can be saved? Jesus. I mean, the disciples are at their ends. They don't get it. If he can't be saved, then there's no hope for any of us, right? And Jesus points us to the real source of salvation. He said, you're right, it's impossible with man, but with God all things are possible. Salvation comes from God, God himself. We often can look at money through the wrong lens. Whether, we can think of all rich people as being evil. We can think of all poor people being lazy. We kind of just think sometimes in these stereotypes. And I think here Jesus is calling us deeper than just, do you have money, do you not have money, into what is really in your heart. And I think that's the real catch that Jesus, again and again, he dives down to the heart level. I might be able to control what I do with my money. I might be able to control some of my external behaviors. But when we're talking about a heart issue, I need God. I need God to intervene. And that's what we see Jesus reminding us of here. Again, another Keller quote, just as this week ends, talks about the only way that I know to counteract the power of money in your life is to see the ultimate rich young ruler who gave away everything to come after you, to rescue you, and to love you. On the cross, Jesus did for us what money never could, and he frees us from the trap of thinking that money ever could do such a thing. So we get a picture of God's salvation, a picture again of that being accomplished on the cross, in one who would give everything for us. So week 2, rich young ruler, picture of God's power to save in that, and what it does for us, how we should be shaped in that same way. Week 3, Jesus and his disciples walking along. Jesus keeps talking about how he's going to die. He's going to keep talking about how he's going to be betrayed. And his disciples still just aren't clicking with it. This is the 3rd time now in just a few chapters where Jesus has talked about his death. And his disciples are more interested in who's going to get a seat at his right hand and his left hand, who's going to be, who's going to have seats of power, who's going to be people of influence. And so here the big idea is that greatness is not found in making much of ourselves, but making much of Jesus. And so Jesus is going to interact with these guys and with these disciples and help them to see that, no, he did not come to take power, but he came to give power. He didn't come to be served. He came to serve others. I think, again, Keller's got some real powerful stuff on these in this area. It talks about all real love, all real life-changing love is substitutionary sacrifice. We do that for our kids. We undertake pain so our kids don't have to experience pain. We, you can think about movies, whether it's Harry Potter or Elsa and Anna, if you got little girls in the house like me, or Big Hero 6, ways in which that picture of substituting ourselves for someone else is just the most powerful and profound picture of love that we can imagine. And that's exactly what Jesus is saying about himself. The ancients knew of God's wrath, and they knew of God's judgment, and they knew of their debt and their punishment that was coming, but they had no idea that God would come and pay that debt himself. And so a powerful picture for Jesus here. The cross isn't a vengeful God. The cross doesn't picture, sometimes we've heard people twist the cross into divine child abuse or anything like this, where really the cross is a picture of God's love and self-sacrifice, his self-giving love, so that we could enter into that relationship with him. And so his disciples don't get that, though. They're looking for, they ask, do whatever we say, and he says, if you follow my way, it's going to be exactly upside down from that. I've come to serve. As my disciples, you're going to come to serve. And so Jesus' self-giving love reminds us that we are worth everything to him, which can inspire in us then a desire to really serve others and give ourselves on account of others. Not because of me and I'm so altruistic and such a perfect person, but because I'm living a life that's shadowed after Jesus and who he is. Mm-hmm. So week 4, we're in Mark 11, 1 through 18. And this is a interesting and somewhat complicated, but I think really beautiful picture once we see get a good glimpse of it, of Jesus going out and he clears the temple. And on the way to cleansing the temple, pushing out all the money changers and the sellers who were in the court of the Gentiles. And we have to know this was a place that God had set apart for Gentiles, for those who were outside of the nation of Israel to come and to get a glimpse of who this God of Israel was and what it would look like to respond to him. And this court of the Gentiles is full of people taking advantage of making money off the temple, of selling things to other people, and there's no room for the Gentiles there. Jesus goes and he clears the temple, he cleanses it, as we say, making it very clear, in my house there will be room for the Gentiles. In my house there will be room for the outsider. There aren't going to be outsiders as we think of them. In this fig tree kind of picture that we have beforehand and after, as Jesus is going to the temple, he comes across this fig tree that had leaves, but it had no fruit. And so he curses the fig tree. And then after he comes back from the temple, the next day they find that fig tree has gone. It's been disappeared. I mean, it's withered. It's died. And it's a picture for us. I have some more details in there about this kind of first crop that would come up in the spring. And you can see this in different palm trees and branches. You'd have a first crop that would come up in the spring. People would eat it, or it would fall off. And then in the fall, you'd have your full, or in the winter, you'd have kind of your full crop. And Jesus is going. It wasn't the season for the full crop, but it should have had this breba crop, or this first fruit sort of kind of crop that would then indicate it was going to have a full harvest. Jesus is using this, I think, as a picture of Israel, that, hey, I've given you a mission on this world. You are supposed to be a light to the nations and a light to the Gentiles. And look, I've gone down to the temple, and there's no space for the Gentiles there. There's no room for those who need to come and hear this news. And so he kind of uses this tree in a lot of ways as a parable for us. I think it's just as powerful a reminder for us as it was for Israel. We don't exist for ourselves. We are on a mission, and we are to be fruitful. We are to make space for those who want to find out about who God is. Mm-hmm. So I think a powerful picture there of God's heart, as well as what it means for us as the people of God. Mm-hmm. Week 5, Jesus is our liberation from sin and death. This is the Passover meal. And I'm curious what the teaching team will do with this, but I think there's some creative ways that this can be done as we kind of interweave some of the Passover text as well as some of the later traditions around the Seder meal as well as the Exodus text. So ultimately, there's a picture here of what God has done in the Exodus. Jesus is saying that's happening here. That promise is coming to a deeper fulfillment before you. The bread of affliction that was known during the Passover meal. Now he says, "This is my body. I'm taking the pain. I'm taking the affliction. This blood is the seal of my covenant with you. I'm the one that God's doing these things through." So again, we get a powerful picture. We kind of talked about some of this just at Easter very recently, but a powerful picture not only of what Jesus came to accomplish and his eyes towards the cross. A powerful picture of the Exodus, the Passover meal, later Seder traditions that developed out of that. And so kind of curious about trying to bring on some elements of that traditional Passover meal, whether we can get a table on there and set up some of those things. Maybe even being something we haven't tried before, but even possibly 2 people working together on the sermon, or even a first-person narrative kind of back and forth. So I'm going to push the teaching team a little bit, see if we get some creative ideas, but there's so much richness in the Exodus text, in the text here in Mark, and in the Seder tradition, and they depend on each other and interweave so closely. So we'll be in continued contact about what that looks like as we flesh that out, but excited to help people hopefully step into that world. I think we do communion every single week, and sometimes its meaning it's lost on us in the busyness. So a good time to really shed a light on what Jesus is picturing in that meal and why it was so special to his disciples, why it was so special to the church almost immediately after. They started celebrating the Lord's Supper, the Eucharist, on a weekly basis together. So real powerful there. Week 6 is that our world is only right side up when we embrace Jesus' upside down kingdom. And this is Jesus in the garden is being betrayed. And as he's being betrayed, he doesn't fight back. He knows his kingdom is not going to be won by the sword. In fact, he heals one of the high priest's servants who Peter cuts his ear off. Peter kind of goes back to his instinct. Hey, I'm being attacked here. My instinct is to defend myself, to pull my sword. This is how I'll make sure that I'm safe and I'm protected and what God wants comes to fruition. And Jesus isn't having any of it. This is kind of, I use the language here, this is a defining moment in the revolution of the kingdom. Jesus' kingdom is not like the kingdoms that we know, and this is not like any revolution that we've ever known. Jesus' movement was one that would bring healing and wholeness and forgiveness, one in which its leader would die for his people. He came to serve and not be served, to give his life as a ransom for many. And so Jesus said, put your sword away. This is why I have come. And so a real clear contrast, I think, between the way that we think about power, the way that we think about some of the ways that we're going to see, kind of force God's hand and see God work. And Jesus said, no, my kingdom works differently. My revolution is going to be world-changing, but it's not going to be in the way that you think about kingdoms and revolutions and those things. This is going to be a thing of healing, not dividing, wholeness, not fracture, not war, not fighting. And so I kind of take heart. I'm encouraged by the reality that Jesus' closest disciples, at this time, they still miss it. Peter misses it. He draws his sword. The other disciples flee. John runs off in his underwear. Like they miss what's happening here. And so when we miss it, we're reminded of God's grace, God's patience with us. Because sometimes it's easy for us to resort back to our instinct, our worldly instincts of running away or pulling our sword, where in reality, Jesus says, no, I've come to give my life. I've come not to value myself in the sense of being unwilling to serve, but coming to serve others. So a picture of Jesus and the betrayal on the cross, or betrayal in the garden there by one of his trusted disciples. I think a picture for us of Jesus' kingdom is upside down, and that calls us to a different way of living and thinking and interacting in this world. Week 7, the cross itself. You have darkness fall. It's a reminder that God has not abandoned us in the midst of pain. In fact, it is through his suffering, Jesus' suffering on the cross, that he came to rescue and redeem us. You have this question that kind of echoes through. I think Mark does this really powerfully in the way that this book is written, is who is this man? And we have scene after scene after scene leading up to the crucifixion of people missing it. You have the chief priests, the elders, the scribes in scene 1. They're in the dark about Jesus' true purposes and identity. In scene 2, Peter misses it. One of his own disciples, he denies Jesus 3 times. In scene 3, Pilate, there's all the turmoil between the different Jewish factions. As a Roman governor, Pilate, he doesn't want to have anything to do with it. He misses responding to who Jesus truly is and what he's doing. The crowds choose to save Barnabas rather than Jesus. They miss it. In scene 5, the crowds come by the cross and they mock him and they spit on him, even while Jesus is giving his life for them. They miss who he is. And finally, the most unlikely person of the bunch, it's a Roman centurion. As Jesus breathes his last, he says, this man was the Son of God. And that's a loaded term for a Roman. That was something that Caesar was called. This man would have known that this was a title that Caesar had called for himself, a title of authority. And he says, no, this guy, Jesus, what I've just seen here, someone give his life for others, he must be the Son of God. Mm-hmm. And so I think you see there this picture of him looking right into the greatest act of God's love, power, and justice in history, and finally begin to get a clear answer to who is this man. And finally, week 8, Mark 15, 37 through 6:8. We're going to jump around a little bit in those. We won't read every single verse of it, but we have the final part of the crucifixion, the temple veil being torn in two, and then the resurrection. So kind of unpacking the story itself as it happens, but also, some of the most unexpected things. You have women in that culture many times weren't seen as valid witnesses. Jesus goes to them first. They see Jesus risen first, and he commissions them to be the first evangelist, so to speak. Go and tell the others, Jesus is risen. The cross wasn't a defeat of God's plan. but a fulfillment of why Jesus came to begin with. This was where the revolution began, and we're still seeing it change history today. And so look forward to putting that in front of people as well. I commissioned the teaching team. Each one of these graphs have their strengths and their weaknesses as we're working through them. I think we've delved into the text, and we've set the table well, and the teaching team is really going to work on putting this into people's laps, helping bridge the gap to the 21st century, and helping people understand, now what does this mean for me? So we're excited to dig into these stories in Mark, excited for you guys to bring your creative angles as well, and kind of help people engage with the reality, the mystery, the profound paradox that it was through that cross that God's revolution began, that God's kingdom would take its establishment on earth. So
awesome stuff. If you wouldn't mind sharing some of your inspiration in the title.
Yeah. I think as we've been playing with the kingdom language, we talked about Jesus being introduced as the King of God throughout the first part of Mark. Typically we think about the cross as being where the revolution was squashed. We have a lot of historical records of the Romans squashing would-be revolutionary leaders, but it's actually at the cross. And as we turn our eyes in this series towards the cross, it's at the cross, not where the revolution was squashed and ended, but actually that was its climax, its fulfillment. That was exactly what Jesus knew he was going to have to come to do. So the new world that God is envisioning and sending Jesus, it didn't end on the cross. It began on the cross, and on the Easter morning kind of brought into our laps, into changing how we know who God is and what it is to be a part of his kingdom and to live with him and live lives that, as followers of Jesus, we're also called to now live cross-shaped lives, to give of ourselves, to sacrifice. Self-giving love and life-giving sacrifice is a powerful way that one scholar likes to talk about Jesus' crucifixion and his sacrifice. And that's challenging for me. Self-giving love. Am I loving in a way that's willing to give of myself and put myself out in order to care and love for somebody else? Am I willing to sacrifice, self-giving sacrifice, to sacrifice in a way that's giving of myself in the same way that Jesus did? And that's ultimately what Jesus is calling to. He's calling us into the way of the cross, which is uncomfortable and challenging, but that's exactly the revolution that was begun there.
Thank you very much. Thank you for taking the time to put these graphs together and to take the extra time to unpack it and to really highlight certain aspects of the series graph. Really excited to be able to work on this. Again, this is part 2 of the Gospel of Mark series, and it's going to begin July 16th, and it's going to go all the way through September 3rd. Looking forward to all the ideas that are going to come from this. Thanks, Brett.
Thank you, guys. Look forward to it. Thanks so much.